Hey, thanks for tuning in. And yeah, this is just me trying to introduce what I think we're going to do on this podcast. So I've always liked development and growth, right, as like a concept. Even as a kid, when I would play sports video games, and obviously I'm a big sports guy, I loved playing the game. But when I would get bored eventually of, whatever, let's say I made a season, right? If anyone else is a fan of any of the classic sports video games, right? Fantasy draft is always enjoyable. Or even if not, I play a lot of the games, try to win a championship or two, and then when I'm done with that, what I enjoyed doing almost equally as much as actually playing the game was running the team itself, right? Like take basketball, right? Making trades. And it's also easier with basketball because the stuff kind of comes to fruition quicker. But making trades, drafting, that was always a lot of fun, right? Seeing how those prospects develop over time, reconfiguring. If I think about kind of the first sports video game I ever had, MLB 06, the show, or one of the first, you could run your concession stands, set prices on things like food, merchandise, because you kind of had a dual role of running a successful baseball team as well as running the finances. Again, pretty it was somewhat primitive because it's from 2006, but that was kind of part of the idea. And for me, that was always a lot of fun. And for me, again, thinking back on where I think that came from, I think it came from what I now recognize as sort of an interest in the development of things and the growth of things, just generally speaking. Obviously, a lot of specifics. Kind of as I got a little bit older, a way where this really came out was in history. Around when I was in high school and I was taking the U.S. history AP exam, and history was never anywhere near the top of my favorite subjects in school. School was fun for me. I was decent at school. I like school. Judaic studies were for me definitely a little bit stronger, but I was fine in the secular as well. I like math, English, depending on what we were reading that year. History was usually near the bottom of the classes that I was interested in. But when I was studying for this AP U.S. History exam, I used a specific book. I think it was called AMSCO. It's an acronym for something that I cannot remember. Um, but what I realized was the way this was written was not like a textbook. A lot of textbooks are very dry. A lot of the way, especially when you're little, history is taught, at least to me, as just a series of facts and events, right? This happened in year X. That person, that general did this. That king made this decree. And that's boring, right? I mean, some people like that. Some people enjoy collecting facts. But for me, especially, I'm a macro thinker over a micro thinker. Um, that was not interesting. And this book that I read for the U.S. history exam was phrased not really as, facts and events, but it was written almost like a story. And I always loved reading. In high school, I did a lot of fiction reading, young adult kind of dystopian fantasy, kind of the Harry Potters of the world. That was a lot of the area where I sat in, but certainly fiction. I did not read nonfiction in high school, and this started to change the game because when I read it as a story, and I started to realize this was actually quite interesting, right? Kind of to see, how did things get to the point where they are now. I look around again using the U.S. history example as an example because that's kind of where it started. Um, where did that? Oh, the fact that our rules are X, right? Well, we're in president, whatever I was a kid, whatever President Obama was, I think 44, right? It's okay. We're in president 44. Well, how did we get to president 44? What did the first 43 do? How did we get here in the first place? Why is the president the way that he is? Things like that became something that helped kind of hook me in as, hey, this is actually interesting. And again, I think where it came from was this interest in seeing how things develop and looking around me and saying, hey, how did this phenomenon get to be? Now as an adult, right? I read I read primarily nonfiction now, and a lot of it is history of different things that I'm interested in, right? Jewish history is obviously is up there. It's one of the top things I like to read about and learn about. But other just general interests of mine, it's not just that I like the thing, I like the history behind it, right? Sports, I'm a big sports fan. I love reading sports history books, right? Not again, and at the macro level, not micro stuff. I can't sit there and read. I'm a big Yankee fan, but I can't sit there and read, 400 pages on one season. That's again, that's too much and this person did that on that day. That gets into too much of that. Again, if it's all about what they did, and this happened in game one and that happened in game two, that's not interesting. If it's written as a story, a development, right? To give an example with the sports, if it's even if it's a very small amount of time, but if it's a story, if it's a development, it's a how did this, even if it's the last 5 years, how did this phenomenon happen, right? Again, I hope I'm not boring anybody with all the sports stuff, but with the modern sports analytics movement, which is even every 5 years is almost a new era, right? Reading books about kind of how that developed, even if it's a very short period, that's what's interesting to me. I do it with Jewish history, right? I like modern Jewish history a lot because it's, hey, things that I look around and I see today, how did they develop? I like old Jewish history also as well, but modern is probably what I enjoy the most, right? Immigration patterns, reading about, I don't know, how did Jews in the late 1800s and early 1900s, what sent them, packing from Europe and to come over to America, that kind of thing. It's really interesting. Economic history, right? I'm slowly making my way through, but I'm in the middle of a book right now that essentially gives you some history on some very, very classic financial institutions, right? What's some of the history behind the bond market? What's some of the history behind insurance? What's some of the history behind, what were some of the other ones? Banking, right? And these are things that, again, this might sound very boring, and I don't fault anyone if they're starting to fall asleep. But the point is, for me, this was a development. What I learned about myself is what I really like is the study of development, of growth. Another thing, I love from stuff, right? I love seeing just from media, from culture. I'm not an Instagram person, but I get like chios from like seeing from people who have some of these follower accounts are like insane. I couldn't even believe it when I looked them up. I love the from versions of things, right? A good example again. I'm not a mall person, but I live near the American Dream. I love seeing the store, the address. For those of you who don't know, the address is a store within the American Dream Mall that is entirely, essentially, 80% of the store is clothing lines from clothing. I don't even know what the right term is. Labels, designers. I'm not exactly sure, but it's all from brands of clothing. Like 10% is Judaica, and then 10% there's like a little article section. And of course, there's the section in the back for kids and the dads to just sit, and some video playing. Again, a from video it's some from kids video. I have no idea what it is, but I love that it exists. So this podcast is sort of a culmination of all of this. In general, a podcast is something I've wanted to do for a while. I think it's a cool medium. Again, I think it would be a cool thing to try for myself. So I've been, it's been this idea, and specifically this kind of podcast. I'm trying to blend my interest in development and growth and history and the Frum world and modern Frum culture, and try to, how do I tie that all together? To speak all about that. So this is podcast again is kind of a culmination of all of this, of wanting to do a podcast because it's just something that I think is interesting in general, as well as trying to delve more into our community. So what am I looking to do on this podcast? Hopefully you've made it this far in the intro. My goal is to essentially discuss, analyze. I wrote this line out, so apologize if it sounds a little bit robotic, but it's to discuss, analyze, and illustrate, and really just in general, explore our modern Frum landscape. Right? I want to talk to musicians, publishers, from musicians, from publishers, from podcast hosts, people who run Pesach programs. I want to know more about all the different elements that form the backbone of our, again, modern, not modern Orthodox, but modern, Orthodox culture. I think it's just unbelievably fascinating. How do these things start, right? How do they work now? People have a lot of opinions on things, and I want to dive into it, right? Why, I don't know, why do weddings cost so much? I don't know if that's a little bit too touchy or whatever, but maybe not even from that angle, but just talking to people who help, different parts of the Jewish wedding and explaining, hey, this is really what goes into it. This is why it's maybe more complicated than you realize, things like that, right? How did they start, their inner workings, and maybe how, if I speak to some people who have more of a broad understanding of their field, and whether they've been in it for a long time or maybe they're a student of it, how has it changed over time? And most importantly, what does it look like right now? What's the current state of the field? And these are the kinds of things, again, I want to use people in these cultural spaces and talk to them to help kind of paint this picture and help explore, illustrate, just dive into the world of Frum culture that we inhabit today. Um, that's kind of where the name comes from, right? From but relatable, which I know is a bit of a misdirect because that's like the classic, the Rebbe who's cool and he plays basketball. And so that's, oh, he's from, but he's relatable. So this is a little bit different, but I think the name works out well because the idea is that it's, from, but it's relatable and that it's cultural. It's things that are happening now. It's things that we can all connect to. It's things that we're all part of, whether we want to be or not. Um, and part of it comes from the fact that, if you think about it, I think we're living in some unprecedented times in terms of the explosion of Frum culture, right? The way I kind of think about it, if maybe the 1900s was more of a situation, and this is a little bit, in my intro to every episode, I talk about this very, very briefly because that's quite short. But if in, let's say, the 20th century was sort of the mainstreaming of Judaism into the American consciousness, right? Again, people stopped hiding. People were not hiding their Jewishness. Country clubs opened up. The 6-day work week became a 5-day work week, so Jews can kind of join every industry pretty easily, even from Jews, but just in general. The culture became a little more welcoming. Became mainstream, right? Obviously, there were different cultural institutions that Jews had a huge part of, and to the point where there were Jewish icons. Again, sports is kind of my go-to, so right, people like Hank Greenberg, Sandy Koufax, right? These became cultural icons and very well known, very publicly Jewish, right? Sandy Koufax is very famous for not pitching on Yom Kippur. So if that was the case for the 20th century, I think the 21st century has seen kind of two things. One, a bit of a mainstreaming of not just orthodoxy, but I'm sorry, not just Judaism, but orthodoxy, right? And I understand not a perfect comp, but just bear with me for a second, right? If the 20th century had Sandy Koufax, and Hank Greenberg, the 21st century has, Jacob Steinmetz and Ryan Terrell. And I understand these are not perfect comps, but the point that I'm trying to make is I think that one of the things that's happening is, Orthodox Judaism, and unfortunately in some cases negative, but I think in some cases positive, is getting platformed, right? To a degree that it has not been before in the American world. And on the flip side, I think the richness of the Frum culture has just grown exponentially. And I think some of this, again, this is kind of a separate conversation, right? A lot of it probably has to do with the fact, the upward economic mobility of our community, right? There's more funds for discretionary spending. So we can do other things, right? If you want to spin it maybe somewhat more negatively, the expectations have grown, the pressure, whatever it is. I think that's helped contribute to it. But I think it's a desire to, hey, culture is a big thing. We're very, thank God right now, Orthodox Judaism is in a very strong, place in the world, in America, certainly in America. And so there's been this, unbelievable growth of, hey, we have our own, culture is a big thing. Let's further develop our own cultural space, right? I mean, just even for myself, right? The music. I'm not that old. When I was a kid, there weren't a million options, and now every single day, I have Apple Music, not Spotify. Hopefully nobody's offended by that. But every day there's a new song on Apple Music. The amount of talented artists is double, triple what it was when I was a kid. Again, and I'm really pretty young. So that's sort of, again, all of that is just to give an idea of what I'm looking to do, where this podcast came from and what I'm hoping to accomplish, what I'm hoping to explore. And for that, I do plan on talking to very, very interesting people. But my podcast, the goal of this podcast is not a person of interest podcast. I'm going to be talking to the guests, obviously, about a lot of the content that they do. But my goal is to really use that, again, as a springboard for discussing the situation they find themselves in, right? I will talk to a musician about their music, but I will try also to use that to help illustrate a broader, an angle of some broader slice of Frum music, as opposed to limiting it just to this specific musician's music. Again, that is the goal. There are a lot of really unbelievable podcasts that do both of those things, that talk to people about their content, that talk to really, really fascinating people. I'm looking to do something maybe a little bit, I'm looking to do something I think slightly different than that. Again, I'm trying to use the content and the people to explore these broader phenomenons. Of course, it may change over time, right? Again, just starting this. Hopefully it'll be successful. I guess we'll see. Certainly we'll see. And of course, with anything, right? As it develops, and God willing, it is, moderately successful. I hope so. Things can change. I'm not, and I kind of hope it does, because hopefully that means I'm growing, I'm learning, right? Things are getting better, things are improving, people have feedback. But this is the core idea driving what I'm trying to do with this podcast. So listen, if you made it to the end here, appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Really hope you'll give it a chance. And always, 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 I appreciate feedback. I want to hear from anyone who listens. I want to know what they think is done well, what they think could be done better. If they have any guests, suggestions, really, really anything at all. Again, I'll drop my email, frumButRelatable@gmail.com, FRUMBUTRELATABLE. I should have written that out, at gmail.com, frumButRelatable@gmail.com for all questions, suggestions, comments, whatever it is. And again, thanks for listening, and I really hope you enjoy.